Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Kevork Almassian from Syriana Analysis, an independent journalist who does a lot of appreciated work. I'm a big fan of his work, and I ask you to go and follow him on his channel. After this live stream, I have all of the links below. Today, I wanted to discuss with Kevork the latest updates when it comes to Iran. In recent weeks, especially after the assassination of the Hamas political bureau leader in Tehran, we heard very militant and harsh statements coming from Iran saying that they will retaliate immediately. Well, not immediately, but in high intensity. And that this response will be harsher than the responses that were there before. Back in April, Iran initially did not say they will retaliate directly for the assassination of the IRGC senior figures in Syria. However, they shocked the world and surprised everyone with a big response. But now we have certain developments when it comes to Iran. With regards to the recent statements that we had from Iran, firstly, we had a statement from a senior figure in the IRGC, Brigadier General Muhammad Ali Naini, stressing that Iran's response may not be a repetition of previous operations and that the commanders of the armed forces are at the highest decision-making levels, evaluate all situations, make precise and calculated decisions, and change the enemy's calculations with effective measures. American politicians admit this, as they have not achieved any of their goals so far. He continued, the period of waiting for the Iranian response may be long. We, the Zionists, must live in a state of imbalance, and our leaders have experience and the art of punishing the enemy effectively are not so hasty. Kevork, what do you think of the recent statements after, of course, a big welcome and thank you for joining me from Iran? And are we seeing Iran taking a step back from this retaliation against Israel following the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh?
First of all, Mahmoud, thank you very much for having me. It's a really pleasure to be on your show and happy to be with you. And I know that we are always discussing this ongoing onslaught against the innocent Palestinians in Gaza. So I hope our next stream would be and our next conversation when a ceasefire is established in the Gaza Strip and the Palestinians are at least living in a relatively peaceful times, because since 70 to 80 years, they have endured a lot. And since we opened our eyes to politics, we have been experiencing wars, destructions, regime changes, coups, and constant instability. And I think the region deserves to restore some of its stability for the people to develop and look for their lives, because we also deserve to live like the rest of the world. So to start with the Iranian retaliation, I think there are two the current retaliation or the potential retaliation will be very different from the previous one. Previous one in April, if we measure the retaliation, the type of weapons being used and what goals achieved back then, we can pick two major goals. The first goal was the message to the Israelis that despite the Iron Dome, the American participation, the British participation, and some of the Arabic countries such as Jordan back then, we are able to hit the sensitive locations if we want to. And they have managed to hit several sensitive installations, in military installations there. So this was the message we are capable of with the older technology that we have. The second message that they sent, or the second goal, was scanning the military air defense systems of the Americans and the Israelis. And this was a major, in my opinion, intelligence success for the Iranian side here, because once you fly hundreds of drones and you send some of your oldest drones, let's say, and Scud missiles and cruise missiles, etc., you are also scanning all the area to see where the air defenses are located of the Americans in Jordan, in Palestine, in Israel, for example, and in different parts of West Asia. So this was basically intended on restoring some deterrence vis-a-vis Israel. But apparently, after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, and we have to mention this, Ismail Haniyeh was a negotiator. So he was negotiating the settlement with the Israeli side with the mediation of the Egyptians and the Qataris and others. So with the assassination of Haniyeh in Iran, Iran has to restore its deterrence in a way that they have to respond in a harsher way to establish this deterrence, which was not achieved apparently in April back then. And this is a twofold, in my opinion. The Israelis crossed a twofold red line here. First, they bombed Iran, and secondly, they assassinated the guest in Iran. And this is something very, very important in the Islamic culture. If back then, hundreds of years ago, in the deserts, when a man is traveling the deserts in the Arabian Peninsula or the Persian Peninsula, and they have met some other tribe, and they ask for their protection, this is the responsibility of the tribe to protect the guest. So they say, my guest is safe in my tribe. And this is similar now in Iran. So Iran has to respond militarily. However, the Iranians also know that they are walking into the Israeli trap here, because the Israelis see the shift in the balance of power globally, especially after the Ukraine war. And they see that the American empire is in decay. And we can see many of the signs that the American empire is in a decay in different parts of the world in terms of establishing parallel, let's say, financial systems and circumventing the SWIFT system, and also the sanctions that the United States is capable of imposing on other countries, and also militarily challenging the United States in Ukraine, and now with the situation in Taiwan, and also in 2011, the regime change war that started in Syria, which has turned against the United States starting from 2015 with the intervention of Russia. So the Israelis know that their presence in the region was first established by the British Empire, and then and the Brits role was protecting the Israeli entity as a political entity in the Middle East, and the Americans then they have come after the Brits, and they replaced the British Empire as the protector of Israel. So when you are an Israeli Zionist leader and you want to foresee the future, a decade, 2 or 3, and you see that the US empire is in decay, and among the collective West, you don't have a rising power that could replace the United States, which means the alternative powers, Russia, China, and the rest of the BRICS countries, will manage eventually to establish a multipolar world. And this will definitely threaten the existence of Israel in the Middle East, especially in terms of the empowering and boldening the relationships between Russia and China. Therefore, the Israelis see that this is the right time now to ignite a war in the region, to reshuffle and reshape the balance of power again in favor of the United States. Therefore comes the assassinations, the assassination of Haniyeh in Tehran, and the assassination of Fuad Shukr, the commander-in-chief of Hezbollah in the southern suburbs of Beirut. So those were 4 red lines crossed by the Israeli side, and those were intentional. They were on purpose. And the goal was to ignite regional war, because once the Iranians retaliate in a harsh way, then the Israelis will respond in a harsher way, and this will lead eventually, like a snowball, into an all-out war in the region. So the Israelis are igniting this war, and they want to choose the timing of the war, which is the most important element in any war. In any warfare, the timing is the most important thing. So the Iranians see this trap, that they're walking into the trap of a harsher retaliation, and this will highly likely bring in the United States. And as Iran, Iran is a rational actor, in my opinion, in the region. You don't want to go into a regional war against the US and Israel at the same time. This is a suicidal mission. Of course, you will inflict heavy pain on the assets of the Americans and the Israelis, but your opponents also have nuclear weapons. And therefore, I see that if I'm in the mind of the decision makers in Iran, probably I'm laying out my options and I would say, okay, this time maybe we should swallow our pride and pursue our nuclear program and develop a nuclear weapon, which is possible in 1.5 years from now if the Iranians are adamant and work on constructing or building a nuclear weapon. And after a nuclear weapon, they will have a deterrence vis-a-vis the Israeli side. But will the Israelis allow that? That's the bigger question. So in my opinion, in any ways, even if the Iranians decide to swallow this time their pride, they will be hit again, and they will be hit another time, and a third time, and a fourth time, and this will be harsher and harsher and more severe, so that Iran retaliates. Because once you don't retaliate, see what happened to Syria. Syria in 2000 till 2013, Syria had a chemical weapon stockpile, and the Israelis didn't dare to bomb Syria hundreds of times. Now that Syria has been stripped of its deterrent weapon, then the Israelis daring to bomb Syria regularly, and Syria doesn't want to open an all-out war against Israel. So it's a very difficult, in my opinion, position. Iran is in a big dilemma, and the pressure is high on the Iranians. If you ask my opinion, what will Iran do? I think, and I might be wrong, that the Iranians will retaliate in a military manner in different axes, let's say, from Lebanon, from Yemen, and from Iran itself, and in coordination with the allies. They will hit Iran in a harsh way, and this will be then in the hands of the United States. Because if the United States curbs this, wants to curb the regional war, they can practice pressure on the Israeli side, and they can stop the Israelis from retaliating again, just like they did the last time. The last time the Iranians hit Israel, and the Israelis didn't basically respond. They just swallowed it because it wasn't so severe. But this time, in my opinion, with the current information that we have in our hands, it seems that the Iranians will retaliate, but they're not going to declare it like the last time, because the last time was more, as I mentioned, more an intelligence success more compared to a military one in this case. So the next few days are very, very, in my opinion, challenging, and we will see what's going to happen.
I think the main thing with Iran is really their statements from the beginning, highlighting that they will attack, probably put them in a very difficult position. However, we've seen those stressful periods in Israel. There's a very stressful period in Israel at the moment, lack of certainty, the economic pressure, everything, the societal pressure, the political pressure. However, their notion initially that they will respond probably put them in a very tight corner. When it comes to the Israelis, they've actually had certain statements that are in line almost with what you were saying when it comes to the United States coming in and participating to stop a potential all-out war from happening. So the Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, he had a statement, and he had many statements previously, saying that we are ready on many fronts. He is recently having more talks about invading Lebanon or attacking Lebanon. He threatened the citizens of Beirut back in November, saying we can do to the citizens, to the civilians of Beirut what we did to the civilians in Gaza. Imagine genocidal intent you're talking about. They're not like threatening Hezbollah even only, and they've killed so many Lebanese civilians. But recently, he made an interesting statement when it comes to Iran. He said that the Israeli population, they need to prepare themselves for an ongoing period where we will be having an escalation. And they need to be prepared for several days of war, and that this war will not be stopped up until an external force comes in. Do you think this is an indication and a preparation for the Israeli public that they might have this big response from Israel, and the United States will come and intervene and stop Israel, and then the Israeli government can say, well, we told you an external force can come in, and they just wrap it up there?
That's a very good question. Look, I have been following the development, let's say, and the strengths of the Israeli forces for at least 2 decades, and how Hezbollah and Iran developed their capabilities. Now, from the Israeli side, the most sophisticated weapon they have is the Air Force, and they have a superiority of the Air Force. So they can destroy the entire Lebanese, all Lebanon they can destroy. But the question remains, if they are going to bomb Beirut and go and bomb Lebanon, basically, where are they going to land? This is a serious question. Because Hezbollah, and this is not like I'm trying to fearmonger, this is an information that is public. Hezbollah can hit every single airport in Israel and destroy it. They have precision guided missiles that they can destroy them. So some may argue the American aircraft carriers, but I asked military experts in this case, and they told me the American aircraft carriers, first, they are already full, and they're not operational for the Israeli side to come because they need also fuel. They need lots of different logistics that all this Air Force has to land on an aircraft carrier and bomb and come back. It's not operational for them. Secondly, the aircraft carriers and the warships themselves are vulnerable in the Mediterranean. So the Hezbollah side has the Yahond supersonic missiles. They have acquired it from the Syrian side. Then they have very cheap drones that they can hit these warships. So I don't see that this is necessarily going to be in favor of the Americans and the Israelis, because they sound very confident when they speak of retaliation and bombing Lebanon and Beirut, this and that. Sometimes, probably, such conflicts has to happen, even if it's limited, for everyone to see where is the balance of power. And sometimes such wars will humble some of the powers. And this was something mentioned by Norman Finkelstein, actually, in 2006, right after the invasion of Lebanon in July. And he was in Beirut giving an interview, and he said another war is going to happen, and that time Israel will receive a severe blow, and this will humble the Israeli side. I think this is the scenario that we are heading toward. But with the current radical, let's say, government in Israel, I don't think that in the history of Israel they had really psychopathic leadership like this yet. And I don't rule out them using tactical nuclear weapons against Iran. So this is a really big, in my opinion, a dilemma for all the players in the region, because it will devastate Lebanon, devastate Syria, devastate Yemen, devastate Iran. So where is the interest of these players? The interest of these players, the anti-American alliance in the region, is to end the American hegemony over the region. So in their minds, if you compare the American hegemony in 2001 and 2003, compare it to 2024, you will see a huge shift in the balance of power in the region. And the Iranians have been playing chess with the Americans and slowly grabbing, let's say, scoring points against the Americans without engaging in a direct confrontation. So why would they do that now? It's not in their interest to engage in an all-out war against the Americans, because in a 2-3 decades maximum, this is my expectation, that the Iranians will be able to kick out the American forces from the region if they continue playing in a calm manner. So this war is highly likely going to shift the status quo, let's say, in the region, and something that the Iranians aren't really interested in. So in my opinion, here comes the Chinese factor. The Chinese have mediated between the Iranians and the Saudis to reach into at least minimum level of diplomatic and security understandings among each other, and you see the coordination between the both sides, and this is good news for the region. So at times of great catastrophes, when humanity reaches to the edge of abyss, there are always other players who jump the wagon or present themselves as a mediator between the both sides. And in this case, I don't see any other power than China who can play this role. China is going to be the next superpower in let's say, besides the United States. And this could be a rising opportunity for the Chinese to present themselves as a deal broker, because this war in the region, it's going to destroy the maritime trade routes. It's going to disrupt the trade routes in the region, both the maritime and also the land routes. It will disturb the energy, the flow of the energy to the around the world. It will spike the energy prices like in a crazy way. So it will create famine. It will destabilize all the food chain around the world. This is going to be horrible news for the entire world. Therefore, I see that at this particular time, when we see that the things will go out of control, the opportunity rises for alternative powers to intervene. When the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, we had rational actors in the United States and in the Soviet Union to solve such crises. But now with the situation in Ukraine, and you see the provocations against nuclear reactors, against the early, let's say, radar systems for nuclear attacks against Russia, I don't think that rationality exists nowadays in the United States. So I cannot really rely and depend on the United States to curb this type of war. If alternative powers do not intervene, then we are heading to catastrophe. And this is a bad news for the region. However, some people believe that on the long run, because the Iranians, the Syrians, the Iraqis, the Lebanese, the Palestinians are the people of the land, then they will continue fighting for it. Unlike the Israelis, many of the Israelis are dual citizens, and they will be given the opportunity to leave the country and take refuge in Europe if the war erupts. So once you leave occupied Palestine, I think it would be very difficult for these people to return. And it would be very difficult to convince them to come back. And remember what happened on October 7th and what happened in northern occupied Palestine now. The entire area is, the people have been displaced and they're unable to come back. If you're an Israeli, I don't think you want to live on the borders with Lebanon or Gaza any longer.
No. As a matter of fact, ever since the beginning of the war, the official stats were 125,000 Israelis fled the areas surrounding Gaza, or what they call in Hebrew, Atef Gaza. And from the north, over 85,000 fled. However, Hezbollah now expanded the range of fire. It was initially approximately 5 kilometers. Now they're reaching Katsrin. You're talking about dozens of kilometers. They reached Acre, areas next to Haifa. Many more are fleeing back in. That was in November. The Israeli Bureau of Statistics, that started to become way more and more shady after this, by the way, they declared that over 1 million fled due to the war, before, not coming back, and during, went out and did not come back. They stopped publishing figures afterwards, and many people are speculating that they are hiding certain figures. The Zionist World Federation, they conducted a poll amongst Israelis outside of Israel, in which they said 80% of them were not coming back. Similarly, with the numbers of the residents of Kiryat Shmoni, one of the biggest settlements that Hezbollah targets. A couple of months ago, 40% said they were not coming back ever, whether they have a settlement or not, whether they have a deal or not with Hezbollah. And now the number is 80, and that's coming from Israel. Imagine what they're covering. So we're talking about millions fleeing Israel, apart from the 1.2 million already residing outside of Israel, apart from their descendants who are considered in Israel to be from the population. And they consider that because Israel relies heavily on the Jewish demographic superiority to maintain the status of a Jewish state. That's why they want to expel the population of Gaza and take over, because that would buy them time for a couple of more decades to level the numbers, even the numbers out, and still have a growing majority when it comes to Israel and Palestine. And now, in effect, you're talking about a massive Palestinian majority between the Jordan River to the sea before the 7th of October even. You're talking about numbers from 2016. Now the numbers are far higher with millions of Israelis outside of Israel. So the reality that you're talking about and seeing now is a very small extremist religious Zionist minority that is genocidal and criminal by intent and actions, running the country, controlling the majority. Firstly, the majority of the Israeli citizens who want to stop this and reach a deal,
Yes.
right? And then against the will of course, the Palestinian population in the West Bank of Gaza, who are constantly being threatened with genocide after genocide. We're hearing comments recently about Tul Karim receiving the same fate of Gaza, turned Jenin into Gaza, genocidal intent. And these people are enabled by the United States and by their backers, despite all of this show of applying pressure on Israel, while simultaneously providing them with a further 20 billion in heavy missiles and more planes. You spoke about China, which is interesting. When the genocide coalition, as I like to label them, went to Yemen, right, to start pushing against Ansarullah and their blockade that they're imposing successfully and bravely against Israel, China sent approximately 6 warships at the time. They did not intervene for or against. The only thing that they did is, that was highlighted at the time, is that they received an emergency call from an Israel-linked ship saying, please help us, we're being targeted by the Yemenis, help us sail away from here. And they refused. They did not respond to them. However, what they wanted to send, which is a message in line with what you were saying previously, is we are a force of stability. The agreement that they had between Iran and Saudi Arabia back in 2023, that Oman was a mediator in and took a part in, that was also a hint. They want to reassure the region that we are a player that is causing stability. We are able to take over the role of the United States if you're worried. We are seeing similar actions of them in Africa. They took up over 50 billion in debt of African nations when the colonizers were withdrawing. And now with more Russian Chinese presence with infrastructure and business in Africa, you're seeing countries unite in Africa too. However, they are still having certain statements that they are supporting Iran's sovereignty. Okay. And in my opinion, they try and do it in a diplomatic manner if they want to support or if they want to do something. Because at the end of the day, we saw Chinese weapons in Gaza, and we also saw a defense agreement between Russia and North Korea, and nothing that comes out from North Korea happens unless it's authorized by China, because China is the lifeline of them. I call North Korea the axe of China. But we did not talk about Russia. And Russia is the country that's also arguably becoming part of this multipolar world. They are the ones who went to Iran. Shoigu was the one who was in Iran. We saw the Russian airplanes coming to Iran, the Ilyushin, with all of the weapons. We saw them confirmed getting them weapons that they need, radar systems, satellite jammers, according to some reports, potentially S-400s and Su-35s. I heard these reports, but they weren't confirmed, at least from more than one source, from my perspective. Do you think that they also have a reason to potentially delay what Iran is doing, and they are using their relationship with Iran as leverage on the Iranians to just take a step back? You're supporting us in Ukraine here, we're supporting you there, we want to prep you even further before you carry out an attack that would potentially blow the whole region, potentially the whole world up?
Oh, this is a really serious question. Actually, I see the relationship between China, Iran, and Russia from the Eurasian perspective. So Eurasia's 3 pillars are Russia, China, and Iran. And these 3 countries, in the past decades, they didn't enjoy good relationship. And this was the strategy of the United States for a long time, to keep these countries separated, to divide them among ideological, let's say, lines, or sometimes through trade warfares and energy energy warfare, etc. Now, there were always these theorists, geopolitical theorists in the United States have been warning Washington not to intimidate all these countries together or to go into different types of warfare against all these countries, because these countries will come closer and closer together. But with the overexpansion of the United States and the zero-sum game that the US has been applying around the world, they couldn't grasp the fact that they can manage this crisis separately, or they can finish with, let's say, Iran first, and then move to Russia and then China. No, the overexpansion of the United States also comes with the illusion that they can hit all these three countries together or keep them in check, contain them, pivot towards east. This is how they say in their literature. But this has only led to counterproductive consequences for the United States. Now, there is nothing in common ideologically between China and Russia, and they're coming closer together based on economic integration. And the Russian side, they have swallowed their pride, because the Russians are historically, they're used to be an empire, they're used to be a superpower, but they have swallowed their pride, because in this particular case, they know that China will be the second superpower after the United States very soon. And based on the economic growth and the rise of China and its infrastructure around the world, and also the model. You mentioned Russia and you mentioned China. In my opinion, the Russians are unable to present to the rest of the world, and especially to the global South countries, a political and an economic model for these countries to adopt. But unlike China, China is presenting an economic model for these countries and investing in the infrastructure of these countries, and hence gaining influence among these countries, right? So China didn't only mediate in the region as a peace broker between these two major countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia, but also invited the Palestinian factions to Beijing and tried to strike a deal among them. Why China would do that? Because China is a very smart player, and they see that if Hamas is cornered and it's labeled as a terrorist organization by the Americans and by the Israelis, and this was the intention all the way of the Israelis, to keep Gaza in the hands of Hamas, so that, those are terrorists, then we cannot reach to a two-state solution because we don't negotiate with terrorists, right? This is how things in the strategy of the US and Israel. But the Chinese, they brought Hamas, they brought Jihad, they brought the PLO, Fatah, Jabha Sha'biya, and everyone to China, and they want to establish a unity government. And by doing so, they pull as we say, the carpet from under the feet of Israel, because now Israel has to deal with a unified Palestinian entity, and not with Jihad separately, or Hamas separately, or Fatah separately. So China is trying to bring the Palestinians together and present them as a one bloc vis-a-vis the Israelis. And this is a diplomatic victory for the Palestinians and for the Chinese side. So the Chinese are very smart, and they're aware of what's happening. Now, will China and Russia intervene directly in support of Iran? I don't think, if it's a limited confrontation for a few weeks, that there is no need for the Russians or the Chinese to intervene directly in this case, unless it really lasts for a long time, because then Iran will need ammunition, and then the Russians and the Chinese can present let's say, as a manufacturing power to give Iran what it wants. But you mentioned recent weapons that arrived in Iran, and this is also clear indication that these powers are interested in keeping Iran immune from devastating war, because this type of technologies, if it's about radars, of course the radars will detect the attacks before even they happen. Even before the departure of the fighter jets, they're able to detect them. Secondly, they're able to detect and give a prior alarm if there is going to be a nuclear attack on Iran. Those are important technologies that Iran needs, because all the scenarios are open and all the possibilities are open if such war happens in the region. So Iran will need to immunize itself against such attacks before it happens, because if it didn't happen and it's going to happen, you are able to deter it if you threaten the Israeli side with a similar force or more to inflict heavy damage against them. So if the interest of the Americans is or the Israelis is to trigger this war, it's exactly the opposite for the Russians and for the Chinese, and especially for the Chinese, since they buy the gas and the energy from the Middle East. There will be a huge spike in the energy prices in this case, and I truly hope. I truly hope that sanity prevails, because believe me, we can be on a podcast and speak about wars, and people may think it's like a red alert, it's like a counter-strike. It's not like that. Hundreds of thousands of people could perish in the region, and I don't think that this is necessary, because I see with the strategic patience and the slow grabbing of territory in the region and scoring points vis-a-vis the American hegemony in the region, it's better to have a strategic patience than to go into an all-out war against Israel and the United States.
Interesting. Which leads us to Israel, really. I mean, they have been the side that's provoking. They are on an all-out genocide. Since we last spoke, and that has been a pattern since the 7th of October, they have constantly been escalating and increasing and provoking and continuing this genocide, enabled by the United States of America. We had a negotiating round in Doha, another negotiating round in Cairo in the past 7 days. The United States administration spoke about positive vibes, optimism, hope. However, on the ground, we're not seeing any of that. They're still supporting Israel militarily. They're still supporting them with money. They send them 20 billion. There are no signs of any sort of an agreement. In his recent visit to Cairo, Antony Blinken tried to convince the Egyptians to apply some pressure on Hamas to accept Israeli presence in the Philadelphia corridor and potentially also in the Netzarim line, to which the Egyptians responded, no, we will not be allowing that. Israel must withdraw from these places, because they're not only important, of course, to Hamas, they're also important for Egypt from a geopolitical and from a security perspective as well. With all of that and with this ongoing escalation, what is the answer then? What other options are we left with apart from an all-out escalation? You have a genocidal regime. They're being enabled by the world's biggest superpower. The man is not backing down despite internal pressure. And now even in Israel, the headlines, the mainstream media is saying that, no, the chances are actually very low. Benjamin Netanyahu is still there. Any dreams of a military coup haven't been implemented yet. And he's still in power, despite all of these crimes that he committed. And despite him poking Iran, poking Lebanon, poking all of these countries. What's the solution if it wouldn't be an all-out war? Allow them to continue their genocide like that and enable them further? What do you think?
Oh, that's a very good question. Actually, the United States is not only enabling the crimes against humanity in Gaza, it is a co-perpetrator of these crimes. 70 to 80% of the weapons are from the United States, and there is an open air bridge between the US and Washington now, between Israel and Washington, and they have been delivering weapons worth of tens of billions of dollars to Israel. In addition to the AI systems and the targeted assassinations against every medical staff, against the journalists, against the public figures, against the influencers, those were all targeted. Those were all on purpose, all these crimes that happened. It's part of the mad strategy of Israel. Look, when Blinken was in Israel, they committed a horrendous massacre in the Gaza Strip. And first time when Biden, after October 7, he wanted to come to Israel to express solidarity and bend the knee, Netanyahu bombed Al-Shifa hospital and committed a big massacre. And those were all deliberate, because he knows that Biden is coming or Blinken is coming, and they are naturally going to support Israel and express solidarity with Israel. So when you commit such crimes in the Gaza Strip, you raise the bar of the tolerance of your friend or of your ally in this case. So will Biden arrive or Blinken arrive in Tel Aviv and condemn the Israeli side? Of course not. So in this case, it is Israel that is shaping the policy of the US and not the other way around. Although the US is the one that is capable of practicing pressure and curbing this deterioration of the situation in the region. It has a huge leverage over Israel. However, the politicians in the United States, we have to differentiate between the officials now. So we have the people in the Senate, in the House, in the administration, those who are directly or indirectly funded by AIPAC. So they have also financial commitments and political commitments with Israel, that they serve the Israeli interests regardless of the policies in Israel. And two, we have the bankers. We have the unelected officials. We're speaking of bankers. We are speaking about BlackRock. We're speaking about the military-industrial complex. We're speaking of the Wall Street and many influential billionaires in the United States who are shaping the foreign policy of Washington. And some of these people have been speaking of the Great Reset. They have been speaking of reshaping the global economy and presenting, after of course destroying the global economy, presenting the solutions for the people. So there could be people thinking that this type of provocations and a war in the Middle East will achieve the hoped outcome for them, and that is what they call the Great Reset, and that is resetting the global economy and presenting the digital the centralized digital currencies, raising the $35 trillion debt of the United States. So there could be also the possibility that there are people in the US are already in agreement with Israel to escalate in the region. Now you ask a very important question. What is the solution? How can we stop the genocide, ongoing genocide in the Gaza Strip? There is no solution except for a confrontation between the Israeli side and the regional powers in this case to humble Israel. Without a confrontation, which is going to devastate, as I mentioned, many of the people in the region and the countries, but this probably is a sacrifice that these countries have to do for the sake of stopping this genocide. Because remember, at the beginning, in October 7, the intention of Israel was ethnic cleansing. We ethnically cleansed the Palestinians to Egypt, and we built what they call the tent cities, and then the Europeans, they can absorb them slowly but surely as refugees in their countries, right? This was the intention at the beginning. When the Egyptian side was adamant and they said no, they didn't accept this solution, and also the realities on the ground was different than expected from the Israeli side in terms of the resistance against the Israeli occupation forces until this day in the Gaza Strip. So they said, if we are not going to ethnically cleanse them, then we are going to genocide them. And we are going to kill as much as Palestinians possible so that when the war is over, they're unable to live in the Gaza Strip any longer. There is no infrastructure, there is no electricity, there is no hospital, there is no water, there is nothing. And they're not going to allow reconstruction. So in this case, you ask me, then how can we change this? So in Arabic, we say like there are two bitter options, you know, a big regional war to humble Israel, which will of course destroy many countries in the region, or we let Israel to continue its genocide, because I assure you, there is no red lines. When it comes to the Palestinians, there are no red lines. If Israel kills every single Palestinian now in the Gaza Strip, there is not going to be one UN Security Council resolution condemning Israel because the United States will veto it. There is not going to be a UN forces responsibility to protect no-fly zone. All these things will not going to happen. There is a blank check for the Israelis to commit these massacres. And I live in Germany, and I was speaking to a German historian the other day on my show, and he mentioned something. He said, we in Germany, we are proud of that after World War II, we adopted a liberal approach towards the migrants, towards the refugees, towards, you know, the people, the foreigners. And some people, of course, have prejudices against some of the nationalities, but they swallow it. They don't speak. But this is the racism against the Palestinians and the prejudice against the Palestinians is encouraged now. The Palestinians have been dehumanized by the press, by the politicians, by the amount of the killing in the Gaza Strip now, that they have normalized it. This is the new normal now. Israel has set the bar so high, the bar of the killing so high, that in any future wars, if any other country commits 1% less of the massacres that Israel committed in this short time in the Gaza Strip, that would be acceptable. So Israel is also normalizing a type of warfare that was not really acceptable in the eyes of the international community before October 7. Not like this. They committed so many crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, in different parts of the world, but not televised. We're watching the massacres televised every day. So in the this could be also a psychological. There is a psychological component in it. When you normalize mass murder of people, and people just continue their day and they eat their food and they go to their bars and they go to the restaurants around the world, most of the people are just continuing their lives despite what's happening there. And then we ask this question, how was it possible in 1939, 1940, when first the Holocaust started against the Jewish people in Germany, how was it possible for the rest of the people not to act against it? The answer for it is now clear. We are living now that most of the people around the world are not acting as if there is a genocide happening in the Gaza Strip, and they're continuing their life. So Israel has prepared the people and normalized in their minds mass murder. Therefore, this could be a pre-phase. If you accept, now look, the official numbers of 40,000. I can assure you the numbers are over 100,000 deaths in the Gaza Strip. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people under the rubble, and they cannot identify many of the bodies, that you cannot even document them. You don't know how many people died in the Gaza Strip, right? But if you are able to kill at least 40,000 Palestinians, and 17,000 of them are children, right? And you normalize it. This is the new normal now. Then what stands against dropping a tactical nuclear weapon and killing 100,000 people on Iran for self-defense, right? If you kill 40,000 people, half of them, 60-70% of them are women and children, then what stops you from dropping a nuclear weapon and killing 100,000 people and say this is also self-defense? So the psychological component of it is very important, that the Israelis are preparing the global public and the global opinion for such horrendous confrontation that could lead into the killing of hundreds of thousands of people. So they're preparing for it. And they are very hardcore ideologues. Like, they accuse us in Syria, in Iraq, in Palestine for being in hardcore ideologues. But they are hardcore ideologues. They're like
zealots.
They're acting like ISIS, you know? They're speaking of the greater Israel. Yeah, they're acting like, say, the greater Israel, and we have to bring the second coming of Messiah, and then we have to massacre all these people. Like, they speak like we are flies, you know, in the region. So I would not rule out.
I think it's a double-edged sword, though, don't you think? I mean, if they are, firstly, they have been conducting this genocide in front of the whole world, with the Palestinians in something that is unprecedented in history, documenting their own genocide and suffering and infanticide in Gaza for the past 10 months. And people who were either supportive of Israel or who took an observing position in the beginning did a 180, and they started to criticize Israel heavily, including ex-Zionist people. The reason I say it's a double-edged sword here is we're already seeing people saying, well, why doesn't the resistance target civilian populations in Israel? You're legitimizing the genocide of other people, and your population, at least to a very large extent, if not the vast majority, are supportive of this genocide, are supporting rape, are supporting the killing of children, mocking the killing of infants or of newborns as well. Well, why wouldn't people think, okay, you're a legit target now, right? Because if you are legitimizing the slaughter of the Palestinian people in such big numbers, tomorrow, if we have an all-out war and we see the Israeli civilian death toll reaching 30, 40, 50, or 100,000, why should the world be like, oh, it's such a shock or it's a surprise? This is the double-edged sword thing. And I spoke about it from the beginning of this genocide when people were legitimizing the act, because it's such a dangerous act to legitimize because you justify it on you.
Yes.
Why? Because the people in power, they couldn't care less about you. They care about their own interests. And that could lead to them legitimizing acts of mass murder on certain populations, other populations, including their own. There's a big argument that Israel is conducting a Hannibal directive on their own population now. I've received confirmed reports from Israeli soldiers who said that Israel implements the Hannibal directive. Families of Israeli troops who were kidnapped in Gaza blaming the security establishment for deliberately killing them, and receiving confirmation from the authorities that we knew that your child was there, but we had to target a Hamas member. Therefore, we took the harsh decision of gassing a tunnel and them sending them to die. That's, firstly, in my opinion, the double-edged sword thing, where they're not only justifying it against the Palestinians, they're justifying the act as a whole. And what I would say to the nuclear option, and we've heard statements from Israel about the potential use of nuclear bombs, which is, again, very surprising, isn't it? Because you're talking about a country with a very shady nuclear project, yet it doesn't get the scrutiny and criticism from international or people who talk on behalf of the international community, when we're just talking about the elites in Washington and a couple of other Western capitals acting on behalf of the international community, when over 80% of the international community, at least state-wise, supports the Palestinian people, let alone the population of the world. They said, or they put it on the table, that let's nuke Gaza. One of their ministers, Amichai Eliyahu, his name was, he's the same person who's calling to occupy Sinai. Again, no criticism, no recklessness, no stop these calls. He's enabled, again, and they're in power. He's a minister in the government. What, does the United States not have ears to these comments? And they're going on Iran and their nuclear project for civilian purposes, as far as we know.
Yeah.
When it comes to the nuclear option, and again, apart from that comment that was made by Eliyahu, we had statements in Israel saying that in an all-out war with Lebanon, we will be using weapons we have never used before. Now, a tactical nuclear bomb is an option. Two other options are biological and chemical weapons. They also, well, at least from reports that we heard from Iran, with people who are close to the mediators and what's happening when it comes to negotiations and messengers coming back and forth to try and convince Iran not to conduct an attack, we heard that they were threatened with a nuclear weapon, and that Iran said, we will retaliate with the same power or with the same response. Now, with regards to the genocide, they're legitimizing the genocide against themselves. And with the nuclear weapons, well, once you open that can of nuclear, or open that door of nuclear weapons, then you've really opened the door for everyone to use it, haven't you? Russia has been very restrained when it comes to Ukraine. They haven't gone all out. People were surprised at the beginning, like, how do you not wipe them out? They have a strategy. And they were almost close to a ceasefire not long ago when it comes to Ukraine, up until Ukraine, in my opinion, being pushed by the United States, invaded parts of Russia and started to poke them even further with their nuclear reactors. When it comes to the nuclear weapon, you're talking about opening a can, and you don't know where that would end. We had reports that Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, made nuclear bombs available for Iran. We also heard reports that Russian warships in the Caspian Sea, if I'm not mistaken, in that region, told Iran that in case you are attacked, then, well, these weapons are at your disposal. All it takes is to give you a nuclear warhead and send it on Israel. Now, if they do open it, they kind of open it on themselves as well. And what I wanted to wrap up with you really is, with no prospect of a close ceasefire. The only difference that we're seeing is in Israel is potential calls to have a new parliament in October. That's not likely to happen because Benjamin Netanyahu is still in the government. He still has his ministers. And we've had reports from Israel saying that they were only actually interested in the first phase of the ceasefire so that they can buy a bit more time, take a few prisoners back, and then reignite the war whenever they want to. With no prospect of a ceasefire, how long do you think Iran would be able to hold back having this retaliation, either directly or with the resistance fronts? Or do you see any hope of actually a de-escalation at some point where we will have at least a period of stability, potentially followed by something bigger?
I'm pessimistic about a ceasefire agreement in Gaza. I don't see that there can be a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza because we're not addressing the root causes of the problem. We're not speaking about occupation. We're not speaking about apartheid. We're not speaking about a state for the Palestinians. We're not speaking about the status of Jerusalem. All the important core issues in Palestine are out of the table. We're only speaking about the hostages, exchange of hostages, and this and the long ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. How are you going to then avoid a second explosion, an October 7 type of scenario in Gaza or in West Bank or elsewhere? In my opinion, a ceasefire is not sustainable in this case. But when I said pessimistic, I'm also optimistic that Israel will never recover from this. And this is not like an ideological talk that I say when I am in a qawmiya class, as we say in Arabic. No, Israel cannot recover from these massacres that they have committed in the Gaza Strip. And we are speaking of the people around the world have changed their attitude towards Israel. They're not speaking about now whether Israel has the right to exist. They're speaking about, does Israel deserve to exist in the current form? I think we are headed to, in the long run, to the dissolution of the current Zionist system in Israel, and there would be a one-state solution for the Palestinians, for the Jewish people, for the Muslims, for the Christians. And if there is any Israeli Zionist who is incapable of living as an equal citizens with the Palestinians without an apartheid system, then the door is open for him or for her to leave to his home country. But this place cannot continue. The Israelis cannot continue enforcing an apartheid system. There is no apartheid system around the world that lasted 100 years. It's impossible. Technically, it's impossible. And they know it. That's why they pursued the solution of the ethnic cleansing at the beginning. They tried in the Gaza Strip. Because in their minds, if they ethnically cleanse 2 million Palestinians from Gaza, and then in a decade and two slowly push the Palestinians to Jordan, then they can establish a one state. And it would be an Israeli supremacist state, because they cannot establish a one state over entire Palestine when you have more Palestinians than Israeli Jews. So they pursued this solution and they failed. Therefore, I see from an optimistic mind in this case, and despite all the pain and the suffering and the maimed bodies that we watch every day, Israel failed in ethnically cleansing the Palestinians from Gaza. And in this case, Israel has lost a lot. It lost economically, it lost politically, and it lost also militarily a lot. And most importantly, it lost its reputation around the world. And I see the current generation, the younger generation, my generation and the generation before us, it's impossible for you unless you are heavily indoctrinated and propagandized at home and you were born in a Zionist mother and father. It's impossible for any younger person to continue supporting Israel. And you mentioned this. After October 7, it was more problematic to say that Palestinians have the right to resist. And now the people who were condemning or questioning this narrative, they're the ones who say the Palestinians have the right to resist. And under international law and under the resolution and also the legal opinion of the ICJ, when the ICJ says this is an occupied territory, means automatically the people have the right to resist and carry arms against the occupier. So I see in the long run that Israel cannot survive in this environment, and especially in the atmosphere of the shift that we are witnessing with our objective eyes towards a multipolar world. Hence comes this risk of the regional war. So now that I said my opinion, do you think that Iran will retaliate in a harsh way? This is a serious question. I mean, it's like a trap question, you know. Like if they retaliate, it's a dilemma. If they don't retaliate, it's a dilemma.
I think, in my opinion, Israel is only escalating, and they are inevitably leading the other sides to respond, whether sooner or later.
Yes.
And I'm one person who said to my viewers back in April that I don't think Iran will respond directly for the attack in Syria. However, they shook the world and they responded. Now they said they will respond. They said they will respond in a harsh manner. I would expect that they would have some sort of response. Delay could be a tactic. They could be preparing themselves. And in my opinion, it's only a preparation for what's coming. I think the world, especially the big powers involved, because unfortunately you have certain countries in the region that are, as we say in Arabic, maf'ul bihi, you know, they have things, yeah, exactly. Things are done to them. They are not doers. Whereas Iran is a player. And I think they are realizing the level of recklessness of the United States administration and are trying to prepare up until the last second to delay, firstly, so that they are in the right place, and see if Israel continues down the same path. But by the way things are going, it looks like we're headed towards the final and decisive battle. As a matter of fact, I thought that from the 7th of October, because when I woke up on that day, I thought Israel has no options. They have two bad options, one, less bad than the other. The least harmful option was for them at the time is to keep the, although ignorant, sympathy from some people, at least. I wouldn't say the masses, because everyone who studied the situation, who has any sort of background, will sympathize with the Palestinian people and know they have a right to resist. Take a blow, make Hamas appear as the bad guys, concede, try and get back the Israeli population, have some sort of self-reflection, tell themselves, look, the formula that we've been running for the past 76 years clearly isn't working. We need once and for all a solution. However, what they've done is the contrary. They went on the worst option possible. They are hell-bent on it. They are continuing down this path, and we don't see any signs of hope of them receding or seeing something else. What adds to that is the fact that we have never seen something called good Zionism. We have never seen a version of good Zionism. This is a violent, apartheid, supremacist, racist ideology that should be criminalized. And in one way or another, I think at one point we will see things exploding. What we do hope and pray for is that it won't be too devastating on the population, of course. And we'll end it there. Kevork, thank you so much for your participation. I highly enjoyed our debate as usual. Thank you for your in-depth contribution and time. You had a live stream before and you're joining me late now, but we should definitely do this again. And I'll hope to see you soon in the next video. Guys, thank you so much for your participation. Thank you for everyone who sent supers. I hope you enjoyed this live stream, and we will see you soon in the next video. Peace, everyone. Salam.
Salam.